most welcome to Heidegger 1420. I will today continue with Stephen M. Rosen's The Self-Evolving Universe, or Self-Evolving Cosmos. I will continue where I left off in 1419. And this is also the first time I tried these new microphones, wireless, so I can actually see the volume of the recording going up and down here. So I hope it will be adequate. And yes, the previous episode 1420 was forbiddingly complicated without a doubt. Stephen M. Rosen is trying to explain something that is very hard to get your hands around. And it is also something that has never been explained before. This is the very first take. And Rosen is mentioning what could be an unmentionable background, a sine qua non for all experience and understanding. This is pre-understanding, and it has most definite effects, although it is regularly not within the grasp of human language, calculation, or equations. And we were talking of Lemniscate earlier on. In the Lemniscate, we could see how something that originally is static, the Möbius strip, acquires a movement. It's called spiraling. And this is one of those things that can be very hard to adjust to. How could it be that from staticness movement can spring? And this most definitely goes against the grain of the Newtonian paradigm. strictly speaking, in Newton, movement is in itself an impossibility.
Det bara är när vi stannar här i klyftan. Det är inte konstruktivt.
It's an unmoving, still world.
Det är det som för mig key. Jag vet inte så jävla
from the past att jag
In the previous episode 49, I made a drawing of the wave, showing that in order to create staticness, the wave needs to be stopped. And this moving instead becomes Newtonian static, called lifeless timeline. This is most clearly also maybe the most visual presentations of subject in front of object in space. Empty space is most definitely this lack of movement. And the missing energy of this contrast is what makes up the Newtonian take on things. The Newtonian approach is this very lack of energy. We have earlier spoke about a single universe by Roberto Inger and Lee Smoling, where they explain time is real. They are pointing to the exact same thing, I would say, as is visualized here in this chapter of Rosen. One can say no longer is time and space absolutely separate. They are inside of each other. For us to be able to see an object like a cube, we need to traverse, go around it. That takes time. Space and time are conjoined. They are co-creator to the bigger reality. They are not independent dimensions. Instead, one can be found within the other. You see them like two brethren, brother and sister, conjointly being what makes presence impossible. It is a shared doing, or maybe it is when space comes together with time that presence is, and then we get what we normally call reality.
Och sen fatta att jag inte kan få alla delar. Det är ju också en utmaning. Men nu fick jag ju just...
It shows also that the observer is an absolutely essential feature of exterior and interior space. It sort of puts into question the absolute separateness of the subject.
Det måste vara tillfället så man kan. Det är det verkligen. Det är hela tiden en rörelse. Det blir slående och jag tänker ju på Håkan Jönsson. Det var väl han som skrev att det kommer aldrig vara över för mig. Så känns det ju.
The subjective is clearly depicted in the conjoined two Möbius strips. One clockwise and the other anti-clockwise. One having a left turn and the other one having a right turn. Co-jointly, that is the entrance of the subjective path into the exteriority, which is also space, or the openness of space.
För det var, ja, precis, för det var faktiskt det jag kallar det psykolog, och mer än Julia, men jag kallar det Julia. Det är ju hennes
the dual cycle of the Lemniscate is also pertaining to the disjunctiveness and complementarity of subjective and or objective phases of the Lemniscate. Also most clearly perceived in the Kleinbottle.
Och det är så intressant att liksom, det är klart jag ska ta med honom.
Where that can be most clearly understood in the contained space, taking a turn and then entering into the contained space and then further into exteriority. The Klein bottle is in reality only one surface. I will read a little bit from page 104. And it seemed that I last time ended mid-sentence. We are a bit further down on the second paragraph of page 104. If the Kleinian structure constitutes the dialectical circulation of subject and object, by which the three-dimensional life world is completed in earnest.
Jag får skärpa mig jättemycket, men jag vill att jag ska kunna prata glatt om det. Väldigt dumt. Det är väldigt mycket som inte är glatt när vi pratar om det. Det måste finnas grejer som bara jag tror bara
and if the self-intersecting Möbius structure is the subject-object vortical spin cycle that completes the two-dimensional life world,
men sen är man så olika liksom. Ja, och ja, men det är lite av olika. Och jag ska kissa.
then the self-intersecting lemniscate would be the dialectical action that would bring to fruition the one-dimensional life world. Still, with each step down to lower dimensionality, the dialectical tension of dimensional spin would be less, the perspectivity weaker. That is the opposition and integration of the perspectives of objects and of subject and object themselves would be less sharply defined. The relative weakness of dialectical opposition in the Lemniscatory life world is indicated by the fact that here only one element of differentiation would be operative, that of the point. A certain angle of the Möbius strip, the point comes into being. This point-like structure is close to the pointedness in the Newtonian take, the Newtonian approach. I would say it is not unfair to call the Newtonian take one perspectival or limited. The limitation is both in the observer and in the observed. Certain kind of sensation of friction, of work. This is pretty close to the T2 N2 complex. We have mentioned that before in the research of Dr. Jan B. Eiskens in Antwerp and Ghent. That N2 neurons are more energy demanding than the somewhat slower, more wider, more encompassing N1.
Och det är ju en fakta jag skulle vilja ha. Alltså Ja, gick igång på svenska. Till och med varit nationell Apple.
The subjective and the objective in clear differentiation, while you can look at the world and not be part of it, but at the same time being able to lie, as Jan often calls it. That is having the subjective take on what is generally called conventional reality.
Och ja, för mig var dagen 5 september ganska vanlig dag. Nej, det var den sjätte. Visst, men
Whereas in the N2 mood,
har massa vanligt eller tänker på allting så annorlunda och
subject and object are so conjoined
man ska göra rätt saker. Och så
in an unhealthy way that the material world seems to be superstatic, unmovable, fixed. Fragmented.
och orsaka testa.
Something to be viewed from a distance and with a feel. Without involvement. This is the four-handed mood that is typical of the N2 neurons.
Det är ju bara utrustning, det är ju bara en effekt av allt annat. Så är det ju. Välmående samhällen.
We mentioned earlier, much earlier, when we took up Aisken's treaty method.
Nej, men alltså vi var så här.
Yes, what?
Värme och kläder på kroppen och till så mycket kläder som växtflaskar ihop när vi reser långsiktigt och så som inte bara mat utan som är extra god mat och så det enda vi saknar är
Vi är bra på det materiella.
ja, precis. Ja, så kan vi säga. Men sen saknar vi liksom det där kanske som var det viktigaste. Tappa bort längs vägen.
Ja.
Det handlar om allt ifrån
Nej.
det är så. Det håller vi båda med om. När åker du till
And one, the slower,
då får du ha en häftig resa.
wider and fractally much more complex. The N1s
Nej,
can go deeper in the exteriority thanks to the fact that they are above or beyond it. here distance has a very healthy ingredient.
Ja, okej. Det är bra. Jag tror vi pratade om det för ett tag sedan.
It's a caring distance.
Ja, men vi för att jag vet inte vad vi ska, om vi ska någon som har
It's an aesthetically, fractally iterating understanding. And things are no longer opaque.
Ska jag tala om för dig när det finns...
That is
Det var ju så
like the flatlanders we mentioned earlier on, especially in context with the philosophy of Uspensky, where everything is non-transparent, opaque. In the end, one world. The difference is immense.
Det gör liksom, det hjälper ändå. Och så är det liksom lite fint att veta. Alltså de visste bara lite om det, så är det lite fint att veta. Det hade ett bra samtal och idé.
Terry Mark's Charlo points out that fractality itself is what reads. The complexity is the understanding.
Det var någon i huset liksom som man gillar barnen. Det är ju glädjen. Det är jag nämligen helt övertygad om att det var. När de var tid för någonting, att jag var ju faktiskt något som man är intresserad av överhuvudtaget.
In the fractally complex understanding, the world is, so to speak, flowing or moving. It is not permanently there.
Och hoppas resan kan ge lite skingrade tankar över för dig. Det kan inte ha varit en särskilt trevlig upplevelse för dig här. Men det är ändå så traumaterna så nära oss. Ja. Nej.
That moving tendency, it's a fluctuating in the lemniscate, going up and going down, in the process between subject and object, processing comes to fore. But it's not a static presence. It doesn't have this dead and flatness to it. The British author and psychiatrist Ian McGilchrist describes our patients suffering from schizophrenia and other afflictions sees the world as folded papers on top of each other, where each new movement is tearing off one piece of paper and revealing another one. And each point in this reality is sort of determined by the previous sheet. That's a less vivid word. It lacks depth, and it lacks sustenance for the soul. It is unrewarding for the person, and the person cannot take any enjoyment in the flatness. See here how the lemming's gait is playing into this as well. Two Möbius strips conjoined together will make up this fluctuating eternity symbol. I think the more vivid, deeper way of living is also comparable to the authentic take on life as presented by Martin Heidegger. And the energy that comes out of this life form can only come, its source is the disjunct subject and object. This, of course, is something you can compare to the take in Newtonian physics, where there is no tension. There is just the front cover of the cube, and there is no observer, partaking, participatory, doesn't have a participatory role to play. And that, of course, makes for a deadened understanding. Lifeless, deadened. relative weakness of dialectical opposition in the lemniscatory life world is indicated by the fact that here only one element of differentiation would be operative, that of point. The point could be said to be the product of lack of dialectical healthy oppositional forces. The last member of the bisection series is the sub-lemniscate. In three-dimensional space, this structure appears as the interlocking lemniscatory surfaces illustrated in figure 5.4. How will the sub-lemniscate be manifested in the two-dimensional environment? Table 5.1 illustrates the general idea that in moving into lower dimensional life worlds, lower order lower order members of the bisection series assume the roles of their higher order counterparts. Therefore, in the two-dimensional life world, just as the Möbius structure would play the Klein-Bottle's role, if it would be an open and closed integrative cycle or circulation. As the lemniscate would play the role the Möbius played in three-dimensional space, it would be an open integrative circulation. The sub-lemniscate would function as the lemniscate did in three dimensions. It would be an open cycle of dual character, a two-edged line with each edge tracing a lemniscatory pattern, the eternity symbol. Then, in the zero-dimensional realm, the sub-lemniscate would finally come into its own. dialecticity would be completely absent in the zero-dimensional sphere. This is, of course, incredibly important to understand. This is borne out by a clear-cut difference between the zero-dimensional situation and those of higher dimensions. This is borne out by a clear-cut difference between the zero-dimensional situation and those of higher dimensions. The three orders of life-world dialecticity are expressible in terms of dimensional interplay of container, contained, and uncontained. And I think it's very important to understand it's an interplay. Think of the lemniscate, it is perpetually moving. Whereas the subject and object in front of space has a static feel to it. It doesn't move, it is stuck. It's a sense of things being out there, like these imagined bricks. They make up the life world. They are unmovable. They do not have depth because I do not have in my subjective part of the lemniscatory interplay depth. It's a sort of dance, a participatory dance, where your involvement is also at a distance at the same time. It's easy to make the comparison between the Gilchristian left hemisphere approach to the world as being already out there, a view from nowhere, the 400 of clinically examined atoms that collectively creates the bricks. thereby lending their staticness to the bricks, and from the bricks to the whole world, and even as in the take of Dawkins and Hitchens and Daniel Dennett, making up what I am. My constituents in this life world of the left hemisphere, or the subject in front of object in space, is made of other things that are not present and do not move, do not come into presencing. They are transcendentally or eternally there. The right hemisphere is by its very nature dimensionality and depth. It is vivid, it is lively, dramatic, what that world do is not derived from previous pieces of movements like the papers I described earlier, but instead they spring directly from time. Sometimes making jumps, somersaults, sometimes moving incredibly slow. This perpetual change in space and time are characteristic of this truer, participatory coming into reality. Sorry to jump back a bit here to page 96. Let us consider the two-dimensional world and the being living on a plane. In what manner will a being living on such a plane universe cognize his world? First of all, we can affirm that he will not feel the plane upon which he lives. He will not do so because he will feel the objects. That is, the flat figures which are on this plane. He will feel the lines which limit them. He will feel the lines which limit them. The lines will differ from the plane in that they produce sensations. Therefore they exist. The plane does not produce sensations. Therefore it does not exist. Thus, according to Ouspensky's extrapolation of classical space, just as we three-dimensional beings do not at all sense the space in which we are embedded, but only the two-dimensional surfaces of the objects in this space, two-dimensional beings would be restricted to sensing the one-dimensional edges of the objects in their space. Ouspensky further notes, Ouspensky is brought up as an example of someone who remains in the classical sphere inadvertently and unconsciously. Thus, according to Ouspensky's extrapolation of classical space, just as we three-dimensional beings do not at all sense the space in which we are embedded, but only the two-dimensional surfaces of the objects in this space. Two-dimensional beings would be restricted to sensing the one-dimensional edges of the objects in their space. Ouspensky further notes, . Sensing only lines, the plane will not sense them as we do. First of all, he will see no angle. It is extremely easy for us to verify this by experiment. If we hold before our eyes two matches, inclined one to the other in a horizontal plane, then we shall see one line. To see the angle, we have to look from above. The two-dimensional being cannot look from above and therefore cannot see the angle. These conclusions about two-dimensional experience appear to be directly contradicted by Ouspensky later in his text, when he speaks of two-dimensional beings as capable of perceiving surfaces, not just lines, of experiencing simultaneously in two directions, of viewing circles. Figures that possesses angles of 360 degrees. I'm gonna have a look-see. Yeah, how would that be possible? Why the discrepancy? Why is it that in one place Ouspensky asserts that the perceptual capacity of a two-dimensional being is strictly one-dimensional, whereas elsewhere he claims that it is two-dimensional? Perhaps Ouspensky's susceptibility to this error stems from the fact that while this approach to a dimension is classical, the truth of perception may be found in the non-classical realm that lies between dimensions. So it's fair to say that he commits an error. But he cannot at the same time be aware of this error. Ouspensky's modus operandi is extrapolation by dimensional analogy. Thus, when he draws the conclusion that the two-dimensional being has no idea of an angle in the line it perceives, analogical reasoning evidently should tell him that we three-dimensional beings would be just as unable to perceive an angle in the surface, which is nuts in a way. It is clear that we are incapable of seeing a solid cube or sphere simultaneously from all sides. Ouspensky makes the claim that we can never see, even in the minute, any part of the outer world as it is. That is, as we know it. That is, in 3 dimensions. We can never see the desk or the wardrobe all at once from all sides and inside. Evident in these 2 sentences is Ouspensky's presupposition of a peremptory division between 3 and 2-dimensional sense perception. One that leads to the conclusion that if we cannot see all sides of a solid object at once, then we are limited to viewing but a single side of it. According to Ouspensky, while we do know of the existence of the other sides of any solid object we encounter, this knowledge is not directly sense. It derives from conceptual inferences we draw about the object. This is very close to Jean Piaget's idea of object constancy. That is a sort of concluding remark from the growing child to understand three dimensions by making extrapolations of the two, so to speak, available dimensions. And this is a major fault. And Jean Piaget and Ouspensky are far from alone.
چند بار ببینیم
It is true that our sense experience permits us to apprehend but a single surface of a solid at a time, and that we cannot simultaneously sense a surface that is perpendicular to it, that we have no sense of the angle joining two or more surfaces of the solid. Obviously, it is not. The phenomenological fact of three-dimensional perception is that it is partial. Very good. Although we surely cannot view all 6 outer surfaces of a solid cube in a simple simultaneity, we can see up to 3 of them in this way. Thus, we can view angles joining surfaces, though to be sure, we cannot apprehend them as completely as we can the angles that connect the lines of a plane figure.
Det är som att det är så att vi skulle avhålla till Umeå. Dina föräldrar också. Men du var uppväxt. Jo, jag vet. Det är ju nästan värre.
These are the facts of perspective that Ouspensky glosses over in his classical approach to dimension. We cannot imagine the cube, seen not in perspective, but simultaneously from all sides. Says Uspensky. In failing to qualify this further, Uspensky allows the inaccurate impression that perspectival experience entails a single-sided view of the cube, one that would preclude the sensation of angle. In Uspensky's construal of dimension, the dialectical character of lived experience is neglected. At polar extremes, where we would experience either all sides of the cube in simple simultaneity or just a single side, but nothing in between, dialectical tension is absent. So the in-between doesn't exist. Therefore, the angles cannot be seen. It assumes, and this is going to sound extremely odd, it assumes that we can only see what is possible to see from a certain angle, so to speak, from a certain perspective tendency. And this seems to be absolutely obvious, but actually it is not. And this is done by a juxtaposition of the differences, but not opposition. Here we are talking about simple absence, and only the things that are present are real. Remember what we said before, and this I have repeated 2-3 times now, but this can only stick by repetition, or rather iteration. That is imaginary electrons, photons are constitutive of what is. Without them, there is nothing. They are a vital part of what is becoming. And so is the, so to speak, in perception or vision, absent sides of the cube. Their absence are vital and part of perception. And this is how we normally, or always, in a Suhandan way, perceive the cube.
ولی داتومی داریم که باید بدونیم سویه برای داشتیم بشیم نه خودم
That is something to think of. It's absolutely new. It's not how we normally perceive things, to be completely honest. Or this is our normal perception, but our thoughts about that normal perception are limiting. It is the invisible, the covered up, that hides or is the subjectivity. The sine qua non of perspectival three-dimensional life world is the opposition of the sides of surfaces. And it should follow by analogy that in a two-dimensional life space, there would be a dialectic of opposing edges of lines. This is the lower dimensional action that is occluded in three-dimensional space, where the edges of lines appear to be merely juxtapositional. Note that the lower order of subjectivity should be implicit in this action, since dialectical action is not merely objective, but entails the interplay of object and subject. Note that a lower order of subjectivity should be implicit in this action, since dialectical action is not merely objective, but entails the interplay of subject and object. It is just the interplay of the both that can bring any one of them to existence. Thus, just as the dialectic of the plane, the three-dimensional life world, gives evidence of Merleau-Ponty's invisible, and in so doing implicates our subjectivity, the dialectic of the line in the two-dimensional life world should entail a subjectivity of its own. If the Klein bottle embodies the dialectic of the three-dimensional life world, and if there is in fact a second life world, one of different dimensionality than the first, then I am proposing that this second dimensional order is embodied by the lower dimensional counterpart of the Klein bottle. The structure that results from bisecting the Klein bottle, namely the Möbius structure. So the interpenetration of the subject is what makes both subject and object spring into action. And in the same way in the lemniscate as the subject is entering into the object is also always already involved in the subject. And here you have the Lemming's gate, the movement of interpenetration. And do note, movement and stillness is here the same. It's the exclusion, or the massive exclusion, the fixed exclusion, as you can find in the classical tape, that is the one that brings the natural, healthy wave of presencing, that is understanding and what is understood, into vitalized happening, is stopped. And you end up with this flattened out reality. Time also get affected. Ian McGilchrist is pointing out that for the left hemisphere person, time are just similar to those structured points or particles, picoseconds or femtoseconds, distinct. And this makes up a time where one moment has no connection to the other moment. There is no longer a flow of moment. It has permanently stopped. You could call it a deceased understanding. Or understanding that is heavily affected, imparted. Impaired, disabled. And it goes with tension. As I mentioned early on in the lecture, and I'll see if I can find some material to link this to. This tendency is very close to the N1 neurons connected to the T1 muscles, the healthy couple, or if you like, the healthy landscape, as to be compared with the diseased, no longer at ease, N2 and T2 connection that always involves tension and flappiness, which is lack of tensegral stability or lack of tonus in the muscles. There is also a lacking in tonus in the understanding. Thinking itself becomes something you have to force. And I think you can see here the connection between the modern idea that we make our thoughts, that they are sort of a subjective constructs that I forcefully demand into action or to existence. I had to put them together harshly and hard. They do not naturally come out. This is incredibly close to denken and danken. The T2 harsh thinking is this denken, which is unthankful. It's a fixated, forced, willed in a bad way thinking, where thinking becomes slave to your will, and you tense yourself when you focus on something. It's not an easy, smooth concentration. It doesn't have grace. It's not easy on the process. It's constantly hardening and knotting itself. Excuse me just for a second here. Sorry for the intermission or the interruption here. We will continue with the art book, and the most difficult thing, why the hidden part is what is containing the subject. The subject is the backside of the cube, the backside of this book. It is the very dimensionality, or rather what makes dimensionality possible. It is sine qua non for depth. Trying to block it out, as is tried in Newtonian physics, Newtonian paradigm, will lead to a sense of flatness, and blocking out, and the trial of blocking out the subject create a random worldview that for some reason doesn't involve depth. And that lack can be sensed clearly among these people who had suffered a right hemisphere stroke or hemorrhage or blow to the right hemisphere. They will momentarily feel it if the right hemisphere is blocked out, which they actually can do with a magnetic infusion instrument. I think it's called a PET or a TOM. I'm not certain about the acronym there. Momentarily it can be blocked out, and for that instance, depth will be gone. So the flatness that Ouspensky talks about is the flatness of the, so to speak, absent subject. But remember, I continue on page 98, but remember what Rooker, 1977, said about flatlanders attempting to assemble a Möbius strip in a two-dimensional space. They would in fact be forced to cut a hole in it, just as we three-dimensional beings must do with the Klein bottle. So it seems that in two-dimensional space, the Möbius structure indeed would have the special self-intersective hold necessary for playing out the dialectic at that level. Said dialectic clearly would not involve the interplay of opposing sides of a surface, since there could be no such opposition into space. But note, while a Möbius strip embedded in three-dimensional space does take the form of a one-sided surface, it has also the property of being one-edged. Unlike the closed surfaces of the torus and Kleinbottle, the cylindrical ring and the Möbius strip possesses edges. It is not only the opposing sides of the Möbius that flow into each other, but also its edges. To confirm this, run your index finger continuously along an edge of the Möbius until the whole length of the surface has been traversed. Upon returning to your point of departure, you will discover that you have covered both edges on the surface. In contrast, tracing an edge of a cylindrical ring maintains the simple distinction between the edges. It's a very good example, and I almost get it now, I think. If you go around the Möbius strip, you will feel the edge all around, and this is very close to subjectivity. It can turn it into something within or encapsulated in its understanding, or within its expanded expanse of understanding, which is the following of the edge. The other example is as important, and that is the example of a cylinder. Here it is in the example, remember, it is not how it is. In the example, you cannot sense more than one side of the ring, whereas in the Möbius strip, going along the edge you take in all of it, although you have to make two turns. This reminds me of something that Alan Emmerich said about the spin of certain quantum particles. In order for some of them to make a whole rotation, they need to spin twice. few turns to get back to the same position. That makes it clear that space has this Möbius strip fashion to it. And this is also why we do perceive the edges and the backside of the cube and the backside of this house. Although we cannot, on a Brunelleschi perspective way, see it. There is a moral aspect to this too. Because the classical mode is not, say, accurate or it's limiting, it would make your cravings for the real world harsh and nasty. Your Platonic lack or anger for not having access will turn your theories, your thinking, your understanding harsh and bitter. Not encompassing, not letting things be. Very close to how it is explained how we go from the healthy, non-diseased, wholesome state of N1, T1 to the unwholesome T2, N2. It's by willing, forcing perception, forcing thinking. Having the willpower trying to produce thoughts like the syllogism. I need to make conclusions. I need to get my eyebrows hard and my vision, my gaze into a sharp, unhuman stare and try to staringly gaze into understanding in the Platonic, decrepit, handed, dysfunctional way. There is also one of the advances Jan Eismans did was when he understood that astronauts, by willing their perception, because things do not play out as they do on Earth in the universe without or with very little gravity. So a thing will not fall as it's supposed to do, but your vision, your gaze will go down, and then forcefully you have to will tense your vision to the object. And that tension, I think, is what creates the narrowed, unhumane space of objects, subject in front of object in space. the Newtonian way is crippling sensation, and putting a straitjacket or unhealthy limitation to what is inherently more open, vivid, loving as well, because you lose the sense of love and caring in this process. I would say that is an integral part of the whole thing. Communal spirit and loving ambition to the people around you. A sense of helping and receiving help. All those factors are of greatest importance for to be able to preserve this open-ended, relaxed way of living, without tension, without forcing it upon anything. And I think I conclude here. I almost reached the end of the 2-hour limit, but I would just say that there is, in the moral attitude, is in the lower take, in the lower dimensionality of the Newtonian space, this grasping burns you out. T2 and 2 are connected to burnout syndrome. There is a perpetual tension in the tonus that doesn't allow for a healthy on-off or dialectics in the body. And that is the diseased mind-body. It will also become immoral, grasping at things, not taking pleasure in them. It is like the drinker who cannot enjoy a beer because once he finished it, he needs to take another one, because the first one never satisfied his unending cravings. All drug addicts and all alcohol abusers are left hemisphere dominant. Otherwise, they wouldn't be addicted. And you can feel the hospice. There's a certain tension behind the eyes. There's a tension lying here in the previously, I think, we called objects fixation. Looking for the bricks, trying to see the atomic parts and seeing them in an unloving, identifying way, like greedy eyes trying to identify the voice of a friend. Too hard to pin it down, to capture it, to own it, and all of a sudden the beauty cannot be let to be part of experience anymore. It is not satisfying, and you get this thirst. You feel disembodied like Plato, and you want more. The greed, the envy are inside of the Newtonian complex, and anger, revenge, sharpness, all those tendencies that are morally of lower character. There's no longer a softness of touch. You just grab things, twist them out of it, library or the bookshelf or the hand of some poor sod that used to hold the book or whatever it is. It's brisk, sharp handwriting. It is a speech where the depth of the voice is not present anymore. It doesn't have a reverberate that is healthy anymore. It is disharmonious, lacking in fractality, lacking in that depth that makes for the voice to be strong and go through. Instead, it's almost like a diseased heart. This sinus wave repeating itself in a non-dual or non-dialectical way. That fixed sinus wave is a variety of the heart timeline, not having asymmetry, which is incredibly important in the beating of the heart, but also in the thinking. It's a softer thinking. The N1 thinking is a not too sharp to react, do not see danger first, are not for run or hunt, but are for taking in, does not preemptively grab the things they understand, but instead let understanding come to one. Well, that's about it. My trial of understanding the chapter once more, and I think it's clear this time. And in the next one, I will bring in even more examples. Why, thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye for now. From Espresso House at Linnégatan in Gothenburg. Quite a nice setting, I'd say.